We're taught that history is a straight line, a steady climb from primitive stone tools to the digital age. But what if the timeline you learned in school is nothing more than a carefully edited fiction? From high-tech nanostructures found in ancient soil to massive underground cities that defy engineering, the evidence is everywhere. Today, we're breaking the silence. Get ready, because we are uncovering 10 forbidden discoveries that prove history as we know it is a lie. Imagine it's 1992. A local villager in Xi'anbei Village, China, is curious about a series of deep ponds that everyone assumed were just natural, bottomless pits. He gathers his neighbors, they buy a heavy-duty water pump, and they start working. For 17 days and nights, that pump roars, and as the water level drops, the villagers don't find fish or mud. Instead, they find a gateway to another world. They had just rediscovered the Longyou caves, 24 massive man-made caverns carved directly into solid siltstone. Now, here's where it gets forbidden. When archaeologists arrived, they were stunned. These aren't just rough-hewn bunkers, they are architectural masterpieces. Each cave descends 30 meters underground. The walls, the ceilings, and the massive pillars supporting them are all covered in a very specific pattern. Thousands of parallel, uniform grooves carved at a precise 60-degree angle. Look closely at those marks. They aren't random. To achieve that level of symmetry and consistency across thousands of square meters of rock, you don't just use a chisel and a hammer. You need a system. You need precision engineering. But here's the problem. There is absolutely no record of this. China has one of the most meticulous historical records in the world, yet not a single scroll mentions the construction of Longyou. No mention of the emperor who ordered it, no mention of the thousands of laborers it would have required, and no mention of the nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock that had to be excavated and moved. Where did all that stone go? To give you an idea of the scale, moving that much rock would be like digging out a modern skyscraper's foundation using hand tools. And then there's the impossible precision. These caves aren't isolated. They are separated by thin walls of rock, some only 50 centimeters thick, yet they never accidentally broke through into each other. Think about that. To build this underground without modern GPS or sonar, the ancient builders had to have an advanced understanding of surveying and structural integrity. Even more baffling, the caves are incredibly well preserved. There is no soot from torches, meaning they might have had a different way to light the darkness. There is no evidence of rubble. It's as if they were carved, cleaned, and then abandoned. Mainstream science tries to date them to the Han Dynasty, about 2,000 years ago, but that's just a guess, based on some pottery shards found nearby. The truth is, we don't know who built them. We don't know how they achieved such mechanical precision, and we don't know why they were hidden underwater for centuries. Is it possible that an advanced prehistoric civilization existed long before the dynasties we know? A civilization that mastered stone the way we master steel? When you stand inside Longyou, you don't feel like you're in a primitive hole. You feel like you're standing inside a machine that was built by a history we aren't allowed to remember. Deep in the Mojave Desert of Southern California, there's a place called Calico. On the surface, it looks like any other sun-scorched wasteland. But beneath this dirt lies a discovery so radioactive to the scientific community that it nearly destroyed the reputation of one of the world's greatest archaeologists. In the 1960s, Louis Leakey, the man who essentially discovered the origins of humanity in Africa, became fascinated by this site. He wasn't looking for dinosaur bones. He was looking for tools, and he found them. Thousands of them. Chert blades, scrapers, and hand axes that bore all the hallmarks of intentional human craftsmanship. Now, why is this a forbidden discovery? It all comes down to the calendar. For decades, the gatekeepers of history have stood firmly behind the Clovis first theory. This theory claims that the first humans arrived in the Americas about 13,000 years ago, crossing a land bridge from Siberia. It's a neat, clean story. But when Leakey and his team dated the sediment layers at Calico where these tools were found, the results were staggering. The site was dated to 200,000 years old. Think about the implications of that number. If humans were in California 200,000 years ago, it doesn't just nudge the timeline, it nukes it. At that time, according to mainstream evolution, Homo sapiens hadn't even left Africa yet. It would mean that an earlier ancestor, perhaps Homo erectus, was building tools and navigating across continents and oceans hundreds of thousands of years before we thought possible. The reaction from the scientific establishment was swift and brutal. They didn't just disagree, they dismissed Calico as a freak of nature. Critics argued that these weren't tools at all, but geofacts, rocks that were broken naturally by floods or heat, in a way that just happened to look like human tools. But Leakey fought back until his death. He pointed out the bulb of percussion on the stones, a specific type of fracture that almost only occurs when a conscious mind strikes a rock at a specific angle to create a sharp edge. He asked, how could nature accidentally create thousands of identical tools in one specific location? To this day, Calico is largely ignored in modern textbooks. It's treated as an embarrassing footnote. Why? Because if Calico is real, we have to throw away every map and every timeline of human migration ever printed. It would mean that America wasn't a new world discovered recently, but a home to ancient humans for hundreds of millennia. When you visit Calico today, you can still see the excavation pits. They stand as a silent challenge to our certainty. Are we looking at natural rocks, or are we looking at the discarded tools of a ghost civilization that lived, worked, and died in the California sun before the Ice Age even began? The dirt says one thing, the textbooks say another. And in the world of forbidden archaeology, the dirt rarely lies. Between 1991 and 1993, gold miners working near the Narada River on the eastern side of the Ural Mountains in Russia stumbled upon something that defies every law of historical progression. They weren't looking for artifacts. They were washing out gold-bearing silt from depths of up to 12 meters. But among the grains of gold, they started finding thousands of tiny, spiral-shaped objects. At first glance, they looked like natural debris. But under a microscope, the truth became terrifying. These objects, thousands of them, range in size from 3 centimeters down to an incredible 3/10,000ths of an inch. To put that in perspective, some of these spirals are so small they are roughly the size of a single human hair. But they aren't organic. They are composed of copper, tungsten, and molybdenum. Now, if you work in aerospace or electronics, those names should ring a bell. Tungsten and molybdenum are high-density, high-melting-point metals used today in the filaments of light bulbs, the hardening of armor, and the internal components of missiles and spacecraft. These aren't materials you just stumble upon in the Stone Age. They require advanced metallurgical processing, the kind of intense heat and chemical precision we only mastered in the last century. But the real mystery is where they were found. These nanostructures were embedded in geological layers dating back to the Upper Pleistocene. We are talking about soil that is between 20,000 and 300,000 years old. Think about that for a second. 300,000 years ago, our ancestors were supposedly just learning how to sharpen a flint stone to skin an animal. They were huddling in caves for warmth. Yet, in the very same earth, we find components that look like they fell out of a modern microchip or a miniature jet engine. The structure of these objects is not accidental. The larger ones are copper, but the microscopic ones are pure tungsten and molybdenum, often with regular, machined-looking grooves. This is nanotechnology. It's the science of manipulating matter on an atomic or molecular scale. So how do we explain this? Mainstream skeptics have tried to claim they are just debris from modern rockets being launched from the nearby Plesetsk Cosmodrome. It sounds like a logical explanation, right? Except for one massive problem. The objects were found buried deep within undisturbed layers of Earth, sediment that hasn't moved or been opened for millennia. You can't drop a piece of modern space junk 12 meters deep into solid, ancient clay without leaving a trace. The Ural nanospirals leave us with only a few uncomfortable choices. Either an advanced, high-tech civilization existed on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago and then vanished without a trace, except for their microscopic garbage. Or we are looking at evidence of extraterrestrial visitors who left behind remnants of their technology in the Russian mud. Whatever the truth is, these tiny spirals prove that the history of technology is not the smooth, upward curve we see in textbooks. It's a story with massive, unexplained gaps. Sometimes, the biggest secrets in history are the ones you can barely see with the naked eye. Deep in the heart of Texas, along the banks of the Mpaluzi River in Glen, there is a geological puzzle that has been driving scientists crazy for nearly a century. This is a place where the Earth has literally frozen a moment in time. A moment that supposedly happened 110 million years ago during the Cretaceous period. As you walk along the riverbed when the water is low, you see them. Massive, unmistakable dinosaur tracks. Three-toed giants like the Acrocanthosaurus left their footprints in the soft mud, which then hardened into solid limestone. This part is perfectly fine. It fits every textbook ever written. But then, right next to those dinosaur tracks, sometimes even overlapping them, there is something that shouldn't be there. Footprints. Human footprints. And I'm not talking about vague, blurry shapes. In several famous instances like the Taylor Trail, you can see a sequence of elongated tracks that show a distinct heel, an arch, and even what appear to be 5 toes. If these are truly human footprints, we have a massive problem. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have only been around for about 300,000 years. Dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. The gap between us is a vast ocean of time. So, how do you explain a human-like foot stepping into the same mud as a dinosaur 110 million years ago? Mainstream paleontologists have fought hard to debunk this. Their primary explanation is that these are simply eroded dinosaur tracks. They argue that as the water flows over a 3-toed dinosaur print, the toes fill with sediment, leaving behind an elongated shape that just looks like a human foot to the untrained eye. But there's a catch. Some of these tracks were cross-sectioned, literally cut into pieces, to see the compression patterns underneath the surface. When you step in mud, you don't just leave a shape, you compress the layers of soil beneath your weight. The cross-sections of the Glen tracks showed genuine pressure displacement, suggesting that a heavy, living creature with a foot shaped exactly like ours actually walked there. Then there are the giant prints. Some of these human-like tracks are huge, nearly 18 inches long. This feeds into the ancient legends found in almost every culture. The stories of the Nephilim, the Titans, the giants of old who roamed the earth in a forgotten age. If these tracks are real, it means one of two things. Either humans are tens of millions of years older than we think, or there was a creature in the ancient past that looked exactly like us, walked exactly like us, but was much, much larger. Critics call it a hoax. They point to carved tracks created during the Great Depression to fool tourists. And yes, some fakes were definitely made. But does that mean every track is a lie? Even the ones buried deep under layers of rock that had to be excavated for the first time? When you stand there at the Mpaluzi River, looking at a human stride alongside a dinosaur trail, the neat, orderly story of evolution starts to feel very fragile. It forces us to ask, is history a solid wall, or is it a curtain? And what else might be hiding behind the parts we're told not to look at? If you travel to the Mpumalanga province in South Africa, near the town of Mpaluzi, you'll find a geological anomaly that has become a pilgrimage site for alternative historians. Locally, it's known as the footprint of God. To the rest of the world, it is the Goliath print. Imagine walking up to a vertical granite cliff. Right there, embedded in the stone, is a massive, prehistoric footprint. It is roughly 4 feet long, nearly 1.2 meters. It's not a faint impression. It is a deep, clear strike in the rock that shows a perfect heel, a long arch, and 5 distinct toes. In fact, if you look at the pinky toe, you can even see the slight indentation where the mud would have squeezed up between the digits. Now let's talk about why this is forbidden. First, there is the material. This footprint is in granite. Geologically speaking, granite is an intrusive igneous rock. It forms from cooling magma deep underground. It's not like limestone or mudstone where a creature can step in it and leave a mark. For a footprint to be in granite, someone or something would have had to step into the material while it was still viscous, molten, or during a stage of rapid geological change that modern science struggles to explain. Second, there is the orientation. The print is vertical. It's standing up on the side of a cliff. Skeptics use this to argue that it's just a natural erosion pattern, a freak of nature caused by water swirling in a hole. But believers point out that the erosion pattern is too anatomically correct. The weight distribution shown in the print, where the heel hit harder and the toes pushed off, matches exactly how a bipedal giant would walk. And this isn't an isolated case. From the giant's footprint in Qumran, China, to similar massive tracks in India and South America, the world is covered in these oversized echoes of the past. If we take this discovery seriously, we have to confront the legends of every ancient civilization. The Greeks spoke of titans. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim. The Sumerians spoke of demigod kings who were twice the size of a normal man. We've always treated these as metaphors for power. But what if they were literal descriptions? Archaeologists often tell us that giants are biologically impossible because of the square-cube law. The idea that if you double a human's height, their weight triples and their bones would snap. But that assumes gravity and atmospheric pressure have always been the same. What if the Earth was different hundreds of thousands of years ago? Mainstream science remains silent on Mpaluzi. They call it a geofact, a rock that just happens to look like a footprint. But when you stand next to it and you place your entire body inside just the heel of that track, the coincidence feels impossible to swallow. Is the Goliath print a natural sculpture, or is it a 200-million-year-old fossil left by a race of beings that once ruled this planet long before the first small humans ever appeared? If history is a story of survival, maybe we weren't always the biggest players on the stage. In 1952, archaeologists exploring the caves of Qumran near the Dead Sea made a discovery that was fundamentally different from anything they had found before. Among the hundreds of leather and papyrus manuscripts known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found 2 rolls of hammered copper. This is the Copper Scroll. And unlike its neighbors, it isn't a religious text. It doesn't contain prayers, hymns, or biblical prophecies. It is a dry, meticulously detailed inventory. A list. But not just any list. It is a map to the greatest hidden treasure in human history. The Copper Scroll describes 64 secret locations where massive quantities of gold, silver, and precious vessels were hidden. We aren't talking about a few coins here. We are talking about an estimated 65 tons of silver and 26 tons of gold. At today's prices, that is a hoard worth billions of dollars. Now here is the mystery that makes this discovery forbidden. The scroll is written in a strange form of Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, mixed with Greek letters that seem to act as a secret code. For decades, scholars have argued, is this treasure real, or is it a legend? The traditional story says these riches were the temple tithes and treasury of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, hidden away just before the Roman army destroyed the city in 70 AD. If that's true, the Copper Scroll is a direct link to the lost wealth of a biblical empire. But there's a catch. Despite dozens of expeditions and high-tech scans of the Judean desert, not a single coin from the Copper Scroll has ever been officially found. Why? Some say the Romans found the treasure long ago through torture and informants. Others believe the locations described in the scroll, names like the Valley of Achor or the Cave of the Column, were so specific to that era that their meanings have been lost to time. But there is a darker theory. Some researchers believe the treasure was found by a specific group during the Crusades, the Knights Templar. There is evidence that the Templars excavated directly under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and shortly after, they became the richest organization in the world. Did they have a copy of the Copper Scroll? When you look at the scroll itself, which had to be literally sawed into strips just to be read, because the copper was too brittle to unroll, you realize the level of desperation the authors felt. They didn't write this on fragile leather that could rot. They hammered it into metal so it would survive for thousands of years. They wanted this treasure to be found, but only by the right people. Mainstream archaeology often treats the copper scroll as a curiosity, a piece of folklore that leads to nowhere. But the detail is too precise. It lists depths, directions, and specific landmarks. It's a physical reality that contradicts the idea that ancient people were just simple farmers and desert nomads. They were masters of logistics, finance, and secrecy. Is the gold still out there, buried under the shifting sands of the Dead Sea? Or is it sitting in a private vault, fueling a shadow economy we know nothing about? The Copper Scroll remains the world's most expensive unsolved riddle, a billion-dollar ghost story written in metal. In the small town of Dmanisi, Georgia, nestled in the shadows of the Caucasus Mountains, researchers stumbled upon a discovery that didn't just change a chapter of human history, it threatened to burn the entire book. Between 1991 and 2005, archaeologists unearthed 5 incredibly well-preserved hominid skulls. They were dated to about 1.8 million years ago. Now, in the world of paleoanthropology, finding one complete skull is like winning the lottery. Finding 5 in the same location, from the same time period, is practically a miracle. But the miracle quickly turned into a nightmare for mainstream science when they looked at Skull 5. Skull 5 is an anomaly. It has a tiny brain case, about 1/3 the size of a modern human's. But it features a massive, protruding face and giant teeth, reminiscent of much older, more primitive ancestors. Here's the problem. If Skull 5 had been found alone in Africa, scientists would have classified it as a completely different, primitive species like Homo habilis. But Skull 5 wasn't alone. It was found alongside 4 other individuals who looked much more modern, with larger brains and flatter faces. Individuals usually classified as Homo erectus. Because all 5 were found in the same geological layer, it is highly likely they lived, hunted, and perhaps even died together as part of the same tribe. This realization sent a shockwave through the scientific community. If 5 individuals from the same family or group can look that different from one another, then our entire method of categorizing human ancestors is fundamentally flawed. For decades, we've been taught a neat, linear progression of evolution, a tree where each branch is a distinct species leading to us. But the Dmanisi fossils suggest that what we've been calling different species, like Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, and Homo erectus, might actually just be variations within one single, highly diverse human lineage. Think about it this way. If a future archaeologist dug up the skeleton of a 6-foot-tall basketball player and a 4-foot-tall person from a different continent, they might think they were 2 different species. But we know they are both Homo sapiens. Dmanisi proves that our ancestors 1.8 million years ago were just as diverse as we are today. So why is this forbidden? Because it makes history messy. It suggests that the march of progress we see in museums is an oversimplification. It forces us to admit that we don't really know where one species ends and another begins. The Dmanisi skulls suggest that our ancestors were world travelers much earlier than we thought, and they were a complex, varied group of survivors, not just a series of biological stepping stones. When we look at Skull 5, we aren't looking at a primitive failure. We are looking at a member of a resilient family that survived the harsh winters of Georgia nearly 2 million years ago. It reminds us that history isn't a straight line of better and smarter. It's a messy, beautiful story of diversity. And sometimes, the hardest truth to accept is that the past was just as complicated as the present. For centuries, we've been told that the Bible is a static document, a sacred text that has remained virtually unchanged since it was first written down. The narrative was simple. Ancient scribes were so meticulous that not a single letter was altered over thousands of years. But in 1947, inside a dark cave near the shores of the Dead Sea, a young shepherd boy threw a rock and heard the sound of breaking pottery. That sound shattered our understanding of religious history forever. Inside those jars were the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were the oldest known copies of biblical books, dating back over 2,000 years. Now, mainstream scholars often point to these scrolls to prove how accurate our modern Bible is. And in many ways, they are right. But there is a forbidden side to this story that often gets skipped in Sunday school. The scrolls revealed that in the centuries before the birth of Christ, the Bible was fluid. It was a work in progress. In the caves of Qumran, archaeologists didn't just find one version of the book of Exodus or the book of Jeremiah. They found multiple versions existing side by side. Some of these ancient manuscripts were shorter. Some were significantly longer, containing entire paragraphs and stories that are missing from the Bible we use today. Imagine opening a locked room and finding 5 different versions of the same historical event, all written by the same culture at the same time. Which one is the true word? This discovery proves that there was no single, authorized version of the scriptures back then. There were different traditions, different local dialects, and different theological focuses. The Bible wasn't a finished book dropped from the sky. It was a living, breathing collection of scrolls that was still being edited, expanded, and refined. So how did we end up with the one version we have today? It wasn't just a natural process. It was a choice. Centuries after these scrolls were hidden, religious authorities began a process of standardization. They selected certain versions and discarded others. The texts that didn't fit the emerging orthodoxy were suppressed or simply left to rot in the desert. This is why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so provocative. They show us a snapshot of a time before the gates were closed. They reveal a world where spirituality was diverse and experimental. They prove that many of the immutability claims of modern religion are historical back projections. When you look at these fragile fragments of parchment and papyrus, you aren't just looking at old news. You're looking at the evidence of a lost era of religious freedom, a time when the sacred text was still a conversation, not a commandment. The Dead Sea Scrolls don't make the Bible false, but they do make it human. They show the fingerprints of the scribes, the edits of the priests, and the evolution of ideas. It's a discovery that proves history isn't just about what was remembered. It's very much about what we were told to forget. When we think of ancient religion, we often imagine a monolithic system, one set of rules, one temple, and one way of life. We're taught that in the time of the Second Temple, Judaism was a single unified faith. But the discovery of the settlement at Qumran, the place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, completely shatters that illusion. It reveals a world that was not in harmony, but in a state of absolute spiritual flux. Qumran was the headquarters of a radical, fringe sect, most likely the Essenes. These weren't your typical villagers. They were survivalists. They were apocalyptic radicals who believed the mainstream world was so corrupted that they had to flee into the desert to prepare for an ultimate cosmic war. But here is the forbidden insight. The scrolls they left behind show that the Essenes weren't the only ones. In the 1st century, the Holy Land was a battlefield of competing sects. You had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Zealots, and many others, each claiming they were the only true heirs to the covenant. They didn't just disagree on politics, they disagreed on everything: the calendar, the laws of purity, and even the nature of the afterlife. The Qumran library contains a document called the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness. It describes a literal 40-year-old military campaign between the pure sect and the corrupt establishment in Jerusalem. This wasn't a metaphor to them. They were training for it. They lived in total isolation, practicing ritual baths multiple times a day and sharing all their property in a strict, communal lifestyle that mirrors modern cults. Why does this matter for history? Because it proves that the environment that gave birth to Christianity was far more chaotic and diverse than we were ever told. Many of the ideas we think are unique to the New Testament, like the concept of a new covenant, the importance of baptism, and the imminent end of the world, were already being debated and practiced by these radical desert sects decades earlier. The forbidden truth here is that there was no standard version of faith in this era. Religion was a moving target. The version of history we have today, the one that feels stable and ancient, is actually the result of centuries of consolidation. We only see the one or two paths that survived, but Qumran shows us the dozens of other paths that were erased. These people were so convinced the end was near that they hid their entire library in caves to preserve it for the last generation. They were outsiders, rebels who looked at the magnificent temple in Jerusalem and called it a house of lies. When you look at the ruins of Qumran today, you're looking at the remnants of a spiritual revolution that failed. But their forbidden scrolls survived, and they remind us that history isn't written by the majority. It's written by whoever survives to tell the story. The past wasn't a peaceful garden of faith. It was a roaring storm of competing ideas, and we are just now beginning to hear the voices that were once silenced by the desert sands. For our final discovery, we have to dive deep. Just off the coast of Sicily, beneath the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean, lies a graveyard of ships that is rewriting everything we thought we knew about the ancient economy. When we think of the Roman Empire, we often picture soldiers in sandals, marching on stone roads. We think of a world that was slow and local. But the shipwrecks found near Sicily reveal a reality that looks much more like the 21st century. These aren't just small fishing boats, they are massive industrial freighters, some carrying over 300 tons of cargo. One of the most forbidden insights from these wrecks is the sheer scale of standardization. Archaeologists have found ships filled with thousands of identical amphorae, clay jars carrying olive oil from North Africa, wine from Greece, and garum from Spain. But it wasn't just food. Some ships were designed as specialized stone carriers, transporting massive, pre-cut marble columns and blocks weighing dozens of tons. Think about the logistics required for this. To have a ship carrying marble from a quarry in Turkey to a building site in Italy requires a globalized network of finance, insurance, and standardized measurement. It means that 2,000 years ago, there was a Roman globalism that moved goods across thousands of miles with a precision we didn't see again until the Industrial Revolution. But here is where the lie of history becomes apparent. We are often taught that globalization is a modern invention, a product of the last 200 years. Yet, the Sicily wrecks prove that the ancient world was incredibly interconnected. A wealthy Roman citizen could eat grain from Egypt, wear silk from China, and use spices from India, all delivered by a maritime supply chain that worked 24 hours a day. The technology of these ships was also far more advanced than the primitive label suggests. They used complex lead sheathing to protect the wooden hulls from parasites, and sophisticated pumping systems to manage bilge water. Some wrecks have even revealed fragments of geared mechanisms, suggesting that the legendary Antikythera mechanism wasn't a one-off fluke, but part of a broader technological culture of precision. So, why did this ancient globalism disappear? The wrecks show us a peak of human achievement that was followed by a total collapse. When the Roman maritime network failed, the world didn't just change, it went dark for nearly a millennium. Trade stopped, standardization vanished, and the specialized knowledge required to build these massive freighters was forgotten. The Sicily wrecks serve as a haunting reminder. They prove that progress is not guaranteed. We like to believe that humanity always moves forward, but these silent ships at the bottom of the sea tell us that we have built and lost great civilizations before. When we look at history through the lens of these shipwrecks, we see that the Romans weren't just ancient people. They were the CEOs, the logisticians, and the globalists of their age. They conquered the sea not just with swords, but with an economic machine that was far ahead of its time. And if we could lose a world that advanced once, we have to ask ourselves, how fragile is the one we've built today? These discoveries aren't just anomalies. They are invitations to rethink everything we thought we knew. History is not a closed book, it's a living document that is constantly being updated, often against the will of the establishment. The truth is out there, buried in the dirt and deep under the sea, waiting for those brave enough to look. So, don't just accept the narrative. Stay curious, keep questioning, and remember, the greatest chapters of our story have yet to be told.